This album rocks. It's debatable whether American Idiot is Green Day's best album, but it's one of the most important records they've ever released. It came out at not just an important time in the band's career, but an important time in world history. And while it didn't completely change the world, it was an album that came out at a time when music like this was desperately needed. There is going to be a long story going into this album, which I'm going to go over as much as I can, but for more of the history of the band and my opinions on their previous albums, check out the rest of my Hella Mega reviews, in which I'm reviewing the discographies of all 3 bands on the Hella Mega concert tour, which, to be fair, at this point is probably not going to happen. The early 2000s were an interesting time for Green Day, to say the least. They released their album Warning at the turn of the decade, and it was a commercial failure. The band played the Pop Disaster Tour in 2002, where they co-headlined with Blink-182, but they were considered the elders of the tour. Although it created a bit of momentum for the band, they were still considered by many to be at the end of their road. The band members found themselves arguing, and there was incredible tension in the band. They released a greatest hits album, which made them feel like they were going through a midlife crisis. Mike Dirnt and Trey Cool found the frontman Billy Joe Armstrong was controlling, while he himself felt too afraid to show the band members his new songs. They eventually squashed their beef and started to record a new album entitled Cigarettes and Valentines, but the album's tapes were stolen from the studio near the end of the production. Producer Rob Cavallo told them to ask themselves whether these songs were the best songs that they'd ever written, or whether they should just start from scratch. After agreeing that they could do better, the band decided to scrap the album and start from the beginning. At the time, the band felt disillusionment towards their American government. The post 9/11 America they lived in was one filled with confusion, fear, and extreme tension. The band started to write songs inspired by the confusion that they felt living in those times. They created an album that focused on American social dysfunction, which is made even worse through Bush's administration. They wanted to make an album that, although was clearly inspired by modern times, would end up becoming timeless. They carried on the musical experimentation of their previous 2 albums, experimenting with sounds of new wave, Latin, and polka music. They intended to create an album that blended classic rock bands such as The Who and David Bowie with their punk rock sound. At the same time, they found themselves listening to rock operas such as Tommy and Quadrophenia, as well as Broadway musical soundtracks. This led them to create a rock opera called American Idiot. I'm sure many people born in the last 20 years or so can point to American Idiot as being the first concept album / rock opera they ever listened to. It's either that or The Black Parade. I am one of these people. I remember when the album came out, I liked Dookie and Warning a lot, so I was excited to see they had a new record. I listened to the album religiously. I had it on my old MP3 player and would listen to it every single day. I learned all the lyrics. I spent ages trying to work out what the story of the album was. This was one of the first albums that I ever got as a kid and listened to it front to back constantly. Other CDs I had, I would listen to the songs that I liked or already knew and just skip the rest of it. American Idiot made me fall in love with the idea of a full album, especially an album that tells a story through its music and lyrical content. Because of that, this album is one of the most important albums of my entire life, and I will always consider it one of my all-time favourites. From the second the album starts, it explodes straight in your face. The title track American Idiot perfectly introduces the album. While it doesn't introduce any of the main characters from the story, it is a punchy, riotous, angst-filled middle finger to America. The guitars are the loudest and most aggressive out of any Green Day song before it. Billy plugged his Les Paul into a Marshall amp and cranked it all the way up. It gives the guitar tone the sound of a hard rock / metal band from the 80s. Mike's bass is punchy and thunderous. Trey's drums are hard-hitting and explosive. It's a straight gut punch from the second it starts. The song satirizes the way that the media has created mass hysteria and orchestrated paranoia. It's inspired by Lynyrd Skynyrd's That's How I Like It. Billy wrote a song that has lyrics that basically parody the way America is seen by the rest of the world. The second verse is especially a middle finger to conservative rednecks with the lyric, "Well, maybe I'm the faggot America," in which Billy pridefully cries about his identity and accepts who he is. The lyrics are some of the most powerful that the band have ever written. Billy's vocals are snotty and aggressive with the right level of angst. This is essentially the equivalent to what Sex Pistols did with Anarchy in the UK or God Save the Queen. It's a complete takedown of the worst parts of the country that they live in and the fascist overlords who run it. It's admittedly been overplayed to the point where the song's message doesn't really mean as much as it did back then, but I still think it's a really great song and a fantastic fantastic album opener. The second track, Jesus of Suburbia, is the point where the album's story really begins. We meet the main character called the Jesus of Suburbia, a character inspired by Billy's past experiences. He comes from a suburban house where he's been raised on soda pop and Ritalin. He feels disillusioned in suburban life and decides he needs to escape before it sucks him up and consumes him. The song is essentially a big fuck you to the home the character comes from as he runs away to the big city. The track is 9 minutes long and is essentially made up of 5 movements. The song came about from Billy's longing to write a punk rock Bohemian Rhapsody for the future, and in my opinion this is one of the absolute best songs they've ever written. Every single movement in the track links together while being musically different from each other. There's elements of classic rock and acoustic guitars and pianos in City of the Damned and Dearly Beloved. There's an aggressive, almost hardcore section in The Rioters' I Don't Care, and the first and final part has the explosive, heavily distorted sounds of the title track. It is musically a near masterpiece of a song. Lyrically, it's one of the best songs the band have ever written, with its gritty and angst-filled depiction of suburban life and the longing for escape. The production is really great, and I love the addition of the almost Beach Boys-esque backing vocals in the last movement of the song. There are loads of different guitar tones throughout, making the song feel like a collection of different songs that have been stitched together, but at the same time the song has the energy and bombastic tone of a Broadway musical. This song is almost perfect in every single way. I've heard it thousands of times and I've never gotten sick of it. I still have vivid memories of learning how to play it on guitar and feeling like I could achieve anything. It's just such a fantastic song. Track 3, Holiday, is the other big political track on the album. Inspired by Bob Dylan, Billy wanted to write a track that was much harsher than American Idiot, focusing on American conservatism and the way the government would alienate the public. Lyrically, it works well as a straight-up protest song with its vivid lyrics and marching tone. The backing vocals are really great with anthemic Beatles-like chorus sections and a heavy usage of chanting. The song plays like a political parade, banding people together to riot and stand up against the government that they're being held down by. It's one of the most powerful tracks on the album. I love the main riff of the track, and I think it's one of the best riffs on the album. The blending of acoustic guitars underneath the heavy distortion creates this very plucky, percussive tone, which also adds to the bounciness of the track. The bridge is really great, with Billy's heavily distorted vocals sounding like a speaker at a rally. The track is one of the angstiest and heaviest tracks on the album. However, it's definitely a track that has been ruined for me from hearing it too many times. It's a great song, I just almost never go out of my way to listen to it because I've heard it so many times, I'm just kind of sick of it. But that doesn't mean it's a bad song at all. The song leads straight into Boulevard of Broken Dreams, a dark, heavily acoustic ballad. It focuses on the loneliness and depression that the Jesus of Suburbia feels as he walks along the cold streets by himself. It's a great song about isolation and pain. It works well as almost like the hangover following the party that is Holiday. The lyrics are a little bit repetitive, but I think they're beautifully written. The instrumentation is really great. I love the quiet, loud progression of the track. I think the tremolo-heavy lead guitars are especially great. The guitar solo is an example of the band using simple guitar solos to add this really expressive mood to the song. It's a great example where less is really more. The end of the song is by far my favourite part of the song. I get goosebumps whenever I hear the baritone guitars, the wah-wah heavy tremolo picking, the distorted basses and Trey's thunderous and pounding drums. It's a beautifully written song about battling inner demons while trying to escape the demons surrounding you in your life. Its concept was inspired by Gottfried Helnwein painting showing a bunch of celebrities in an all-night diner. I think listening to the song while looking at the painting is a really beautiful experience and brings out a lot of the themes of the track. This is also another case of a song being overplayed to the point where I never listen to it. Unless I'm listening to the album, I am really sick of this song, but I don't think it's a bad song at all. Are We the Waiting is essentially the sequel to Boulevard of Broken Dreams. It follows the same themes of loneliness that the character faces. Jesus of Suburbia starts to feel that he's losing his mind from walking alone along the road. The delay-heavy guitar riff is really pretty and blends well with the distorted root notes played later on. The chorus has some really great vocals with the whole band singing to create an almost choir effect. This is one of the only songs I'd possibly consider to be filler on the album, as it doesn't really add a lot that Boulevard of Broken Dreams didn't add to the album's narrative, but I don't think it's a terrible song. It abruptly leads into St.Jimmy, one of the album's most pounding, fast and hard-hitting tracks. Following the feeling of isolation, Jesus of Suburbia completely loses his mind and manifests a new identity called St.Jimmy. It's a pivotal part in the character's arc, showing him separating the solemn, melancholic side of his identity from the badass punk side of himself. It's supposed to represent the sinner-saint duality. The song is really great, with its lyrics about drug abuse, ego, and the cartoonish way that punks are viewed. It seems almost like a straight-up satire of the genre's image, with St.Jimmy being everything that a surface punk is believed to be. It has some of the most energetic and aggressive instrumentation ever seen from the band, with its pounding and rhythmic power chords and lightning-fast drum patterns. The second half of the song is much slower and sounds almost triumphant. It's a really great little punk track and one of the album's highlights. Give Me Novocaine is one of the album's slower moments, but it still has the quiet, loud dynamic that Boulevard has. The song shows Jesus of Suburbia wanting to take drugs to relieve his stress, with him asking for reassurance from St.Jimmy. Its lyrics are written in the very vivid and almost grotesque way that Billy normally writes about drug abuse, but there's an underlying fear and nervousness in the lyrics, which are helped by his vocals that has this really uneasy sound in the verses. The instrumentation is really beautiful. I love the acoustic guitars with these effect-heavy slide guitar parts over them. It gives it a really dreamlike feel that adds an almost psychedelic sound to the track. There's also an electric piano in the mix, which helps add to this feeling. The progression and the quiet, loud dynamic works incredibly well on this track due to the really angsty, in-your-face chorus. I think this is one of the more overlooked tracks on the album. It leads straight into She's a Rebel. This song is a romantic song that shows Jesus meeting the character of What's Her Name. Billy based the character on all the women that he's been involved with during his life. She's a free-spirited girl who gives him the relief that he's been looking for. It's a very sweet little song with really catchy vocals and incredibly simple yet memorable instrumentation. There's not really much to say about the song. It's the shortest on the album, clocking in at exactly 2 minutes, and it doesn't have a lot going for it. It's instrumentally pretty basic and one of the least experimental on the album, but it's a nice little pop punk song. Extraordinary Girl is basically an expansion of She's a Rebel, but with this really weird Indian influence in its instrumentation. It's basically what you'd expect if you blended a Green Day song with Ravi Shankar. It's a really interesting and beautifully written song. Lyrically, it shows St.Jimmy falling in love with What's Her Name's free punk attitude, but the relationship starts to hit the rocks as the song progresses. The chorus is really great and catchy. The song has a very bouncy and almost otherworldly and psychedelic feel, which blends in well with the character's drug usage. There's a lot of simple lyrics in the song, but there are some that I really love. Her Heart's Apocalypse is one that I can't explain why, but I really love that line. It's in my opinion one of the band's most underrated tracks and one of my favorites on the album. The song leads straight into Letter Bomb, which is my favorite Green Day song of all time. With many bands, my favorite song by them shifts across the years, but Letter Bomb has been my favorite Green Day song pretty much since I first heard it. I have vivid memories of listening to the song on loop. It's a song that has followed me throughout my life, and it's the one that means the most to me. My love for it may be more because of personal reasons, but I still think it's the best song on American Idiot and one of the band's greatest songs. It starts off with a little section sung by Kathleen Hanna before the song kicks in. The song is one of the most explosive and anthemic gut punches on the record. What's Her Name leaves Jesus believing him to be too self-destructive and melodramatic. The song is sung from What's Her Name's perspective and is essentially a letter that she leaves Jesus after she leaves him. It's a song that questions the angst and anger of the album and how the character's motives are completely meaningless and will only lead to self-destruction and eventual death. It's sung through this very punchy and aggressive instrumentation, which is chaotic and incredibly in your face, but at the same time it's very melodic, catchy and epic. It's one of the most powerful and angst-filled tracks on the album. I love the vivid and angry lyrics, which completely tears apart and destroys the main character of the song. The intro from Kathleen Hanna is fantastic as well. It has a really catchy nursery rhyme sound to it, but it's also really creepy. It's meant to be something that will basically loop in your head for the rest of the album, and as it's something that the Jesus of Suburbia himself cannot escape from, and it works really well. I really love this song. I've heard it a million times and I can hear it a million more. The next song, Wake Me Up When September Ends, is a complete diversion from the album's story and actually has nothing to to do with any of it. Its placement in the album is still very strange, but it's such a great song that I don't really have too much of a problem with it. The song is an incredibly autobiographical song focusing on the death of Billy's father. It's one of the most emotional songs that the band have ever written, with him dealing with the pain and depression caused by losing his father at such a young age. The quiet, loud dynamic helps add to this feeling of sadness and confusion caused by his father's death. Billy's vocals are somber and heartbroken and never have the whiny, shouting sound that you expect from him. His vocals are very reminiscent of the vocals from Good Riddance and how emotional and clean he sounds. The instrumentation is really great. I love the bass line on the track. The mixture of acoustic guitars and electric guitars sound really beautiful, and I love the addition of things like xylophones and organs throughout the song. It adds an almost soft rock feel to the track. It's one of the band's most emotional and powerful songs. While I do think, again, it's one that's a little bit overplayed, I don't think it takes away from how great the song is at all. The next song, Homecoming, is basically another Jesus of Suburbia. It's a 9.5-minute, 5-part song which serves as the album's climax. In the song, Jesus of Suburbia feels completely lost and confused following What's-Her-Name leaving him. He decides to kill off his St.Jimmy alter ego and goes home to what he ran away from before. He decides to settle with an ordinary life, however he finds himself reflecting on what he left behind and realizes that he still needs to find somewhere different that he can call home. It's a very different song to Jesus of Suburbia, with the instrumentation being much more rooted in the classic rock influence on the album. This is especially shown in part 4, Rock and Roll Girlfriend, where Trey sings lead vocals. This section is a straight up rock and roll movement with a piano and saxophone blended into the track. While I don't think this song works as strongly or as powerfully as Jesus of Suburbia does, it's hard to deny that this isn't incredibly anthemic and doesn't bring the story to a close in a really poignant and open-ended way. Much of the album's themes are brought together. There are many references to lyrics and melodies in previous songs. It is basically the really huge and epic climax that every musical has. The song was created from a single jam session where every member of the band tried to outwrite the other member. It creates a song that feels very divided and doesn't come together quite as well as Jesus of Suburbia, but I still really like the song. The last song on the album, What's the Name, plays like an epilogue to the story. Jesus of Suburbia is still living his life in normality, but he starts to think of his memories of What's her name. However, these memories are very faint and he can't remember her name anymore, so he ponders what she's up to now while trying incredibly hard to forget about her. I think this is a really great, catchy and aggressive pop-punk track about remembering an ex-lover and trying to rid your head of those memories. It's something that anyone who's gone through a breakup will relate to, and I think it's a really beautiful and poignant moment to end the album on. The chorus is really catchy and memorable. The instrumentation starts off really somber and quiet before exploding into the hard-hitting, heavily distorted sound that most of the album possesses. It's one of the few songs on the album that I think works really well in the album's narrative, but equally works well as a standalone track. It's one of my favourites on the album and possibly my favourite closing track that the band have ever done. What is there even left to say about this album? It's a powerful coming-of-age punk rock opera that perfectly encapsulates the confusion, anger and fear in the post-9/11 America that Bush led. It features some of Green Day's best instrumentation, lyrics and just all-around songs. It's a fantastic album and one of my favourite rock albums of the 2000s. The album has had such a huge impact on my life and my own songwriting that I'm forever indebted to it. It was a gigantic hit for the band as well. It peaked at #1 in 19 countries, it sold 16 million copies worldwide, it won the Grammy for Best Rock Album, it reached 225 on Rolling Stone's Best Albums of All Time list, it even spawned a Broadway musical. When I look through the biggest rock albums of the 2000s, there's very few that I can see have become instant classics and will be remembered and discussed for decades to come, but this is right at the top of the list for me. This album took the band to new levels of success and cemented them as one of the biggest rock bands in the world. While they haven't released anywhere near as successful or even good as this album, they could never make new music again and still be remembered and be able to tour off the back of this album. It's a complete triumph of punk rock and pop punk. It's just a shame that they followed it up with 6 albums that range from mediocre to absolute garbage.